Hello, 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 and welcome to your Nature Journal Educators Forum. I am your host, John Muir Laws, here today with our amazing co-host, Avea, the Mad Botanist Moore. We are happy to see all of you today. And today we're going to be taking a look at giving feedback. What we're about to do is to practice giving feedforward or feedback. Feedforward, I really like that idea the best. Because what you're thinking about the idea of feed forward, it kind of ties in this growth mindset that I'm giving having this interaction to help us kind of the next thing happen. Sometimes when it's feedback, we're just that can feed the inner critic. And a great way of kind of getting the inner critic to simmer down is that any kind of stuff you're doing with kind of to help people look at their nature journal pages is in appreciation and with a nod towards how are we going to kind of develop and how are we going to grow into better nature journalers. And I can take that information and then use it for the next page instead of just looking back at something that already happened and kind of like, oh, I wish I did that differently. So it's all about the next page and then the page after that and the page after that. So let's first, I want to kind of deconstruct what I find doesn't work. Everybody drop into the chat, but don't hit send yet. What you think would be like the worst thing that or some things that would be less productive to say to students that might be things that we would easily say. Sometimes, everything depends on context, of course, but let's see here. So drive into the chat, some things that might be kind of kerflop. And when you're ready, hit send. What is that? That's right. I mean, that wouldn't make me feel good. We don't expect you to have as many drawings as that person over there. What a beautiful picture. I would do it differently. You're so talented. Ooh, that is so pretty. So what's weird about a bunch of these things is they're positive. That's pretty. You're talented. These are compliments. What's not to like about that? So the problem is with one of these when I'm saying you're so talented, that means others aren't. It also means you have this condition, this talent, and you're kind of playing off of that. And that means there's a limit to it. When I'm saying, you're so good at whatever it is, that's a fixed trait. We're not thinking about the work that they're doing towards something, saying like, you're so good at math. There's a trait you have of being good at math, and that has limits. It turns out when you encourage people that way, they are less likely to take risks. Isn't that strange? We think we're being positive. And so, but it's super easy. I find myself sometimes, very often do it. Like all these pictures will come out on a table, and I find myself like I'm drawn to complexity and detail, and I will go to this like really detailed page, and I will start looking at that one first. I'm sending a message when I do that, like I value these ones more than the other ones. So even the order in which I look at them and give feedback, the students are noticing all those sorts of things. So if you start with all the pretty picture ones and then make your way into the other ones, you don't want to be last in line. And what we say when we give the feedback to students, I think that feedback is really, really important because it's this opportunity to strengthen a student's understanding of what they did, help them think about what the next stage in development and what they're doing is going to be. And it also can help you develop your relationship with that student. They've authentically put a whole bunch of their own experience down on this piece of paper. And the way that you interact with this shows the degree to which you care or don't care. So I just want to quickly tell you some things that I find work really well. We're then going to throw this open to a conversation with anybody, other people who have strategies of ways that you give feedback that you find really successful. We're going to encourage you to share those with everybody here. And then we're going to drop out into some breakout rooms, and we're going to give some feedback about we're going to, sorry, we'll have some practice about how to give feedback. So here's my favorite thing to do when I'm giving feedback is I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of. So all I have to do is just notice something about the student's page and notice that back to them. Like, I noticed that you noticed this. Wow, that's interesting. I can also ask questions about what is on the page. I can ask questions about their questions. I can ask questions about their I notices. I can ask questions about their it reminds me ofs. And also, if I look down at the student's page and something that I see reminds me of something that I have seen before or a different sort of thing, I can share that. Like, oh yeah, I once saw this. This thing was happening. Like, did that your critter then end up doing this? Because when I was, whatever it is, you can use your I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of, just to kind of reflect back to them. And when you do that, it creates this authentic dialogue with the student. Just as when you do, I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of, when you're looking at a squirrel, right? When you do, I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of, looking at somebody's, I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of looking at that squirrel. You can get into these same kinds of interesting conversations. It gets your brain kind of thinking in a fun, non-judgy way. Let me just give you an example of what that might look like. And I've got one of my journals here. And we'll see. Sometimes when I turn this on, the first time I do it, the camera, black screen of death. There it is. Ha, it's back. So let's say we have, here's a page. So I can notice something about what they did. So I just isn't it strange that the stamen have these two colors in them? I wonder what's going on with the colors there. Kind of reminds me of a hot dog and in a hot dog bun there. Right. So what I just did is I noticed something that they would record. I asked a question about it, and I did it reminds me of. Or I can just try an it reminds me of. Oh, look at those spots on there. That reminds me of the spots on a leopard. Right. So I can just do, I notice it reminds, and I wonder it reminds me of, about the observations that they've made. Another thing that I can do is I can just notice the sort of question that they put down. Like, what causes leaf spots? And I can just reflect back to them like, what an interesting question. So what were you thinking about when you wrote that question? And so, well, I was seeing these little spots here, and I just wondered, like, why there are no spots here? Why are they like, oh, and then you can have a discussion about that. You don't have to have the answer to it. You just have a discussion about spots on leaves. They are already interested in this. And you can kind of engage around that question. Another thing you can do is notice how they're recording information. Like, I noticed that you're kind of thinking about this at different scales. Was this life size? Yes. Okay, cool. So you've got an enlargement over here, something life size, and then there's a map over here where you're zooming out. I'm noticing that you're recording things at different scales. Or I'm noticing that you're counting how many plants have petals of these different colors. Wonder why there were so many more of these white ones. You think that's a soil phenomenon? Were these growing right next to each other, or were they kind of regional? Because like if it was a soil thing, I would expect like all the white ones to be together and all the purple ones to be together. So when you saw these, were they all mixed together, or were they kind of in zones? Oh, but you know what? if they're like clones underground, that could make that same sort of clumping pattern. Huh. What do you think about it? So you can just kind of go off on tangents and geek out with whatever they have found. And that's that's a really useful way of giving feedback. Um, a Another thing that you can do is you can just do some storytelling around something. Um, so you can, let's go to a different page. Whoop. Ha. So here's a page of things. Um, and I can ask, what tell me about, for you, what was the most interesting thing that you observed as you were making this journal entry? Were there any surprises for you? Um, if you were to follow up on this, how might you do that? Or you can just say, like, whoa, all right, so here, is this a moldy orange? This is a moldy orange, isn't it? Okay, so you got to tell me the story here. Tell me the backstory with this, right? And invite them to do some storytelling with whatever it is that they were looking at. Um, and just sort of have a conversation in and around whatever it was that they were looking at. And that is really a fun way to engage with a page. Just, you want to invite them to, what happened then? What happened then? Um, and as you are doing that with them, you're just noticing what they noticed, asking questions, and making connections yourself. Again, that I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of more moldy orange. Didn't that smell? Like, what was going on? Huh. Um, so that's a just sort of storytelling with things is also very useful. Another thing to think about is sometimes you have specific goals. You have specific goals, like, or something that the student may be working on. The best way to kind of find out what a student's goals are is to ask them, what are you currently working on in your nature journal at this time? What for you is kind of your growth edge? When you're doing this, were you trying to what were you trying to make happen, right? And how are you going about it? Then you can sort of give feedback about, and we can have a conversation around whatever, is their current growth edge. You can also, just sort of thinking about this idea of growth, you can have conversations wrapped around the idea of growth mindset. And I find a very useful way to do this is to kind of frame it two ways. I don't say, what was the best part of this, and what part, don't you is not good, right? Because then that gets us kind of judgy and often gets us thinking about that can kind of get a lot closer to, like, what is the prettiest part of this and what is the least pretty part of it? And it kind of gets kids thinking like that. But if instead you say, what part of this was the most interesting or the most fun for you? What part of this page were you having the most fun? And very often, the part of the page where they're having the most fun is the part where you can see that, these moments where they're like really kind of geeking out on something. If you spot one of those things, you say, like, tell me about how you're feeling when you're doing this part right here, right? And they can tell you about, like, how much fun it was to do that, or the most interesting part of that. You could also ask, is there a strategy here that you could apply to another sort of journaling environment or another project? On the flip side of that, we can also get them to look critically but non-judgmentally at what they're doing. And this asks the student, If you were to do this again, or perhaps on a different topic or a different subject, is there anything that you would do differently next time? And what would that be? Why is that? And then so you're getting them to think about their strategies that they're doing this are plastic, and you can apply things in different ways in different contexts. So I find that's much better than like, what part didn't you like, right? Or what is the worst part of this? You're asking if what would you do differently in a similar sort of a project. Interesting things will come up, and then you're getting people to kind of metacognitively reflect on their experience and what they did. Lastly, just to reflect on their nature journaling tools, you can look at questions and just notice what kinds of questions people are asking. Are these mostly what questions? Are these where questions? I find it's really useful for me to every once in a while kind of notice in my questions that I can actually look through a bunch of pages and say, how often am I asking questions that are kind of about spatial relations of things? Where questions? How often am I asking kind of temporal questions? When questions? So we can just kind of reflect on things. The questions we ask change the way that people will think and kind of engage with you. And my last thought on this before we kind of open this up to a discussion with everybody, that's where we're going in a moment, and please do share your thoughts and ideas, is that in order to have a really productive, rich conversation with us, the student needs to trust you. And the more that the student sees that they can trust you, the more they will open up to you in conversations in the future. So in this conversation, you are building trust. And the best way to show that you are worthy of that trust is to be authentically present in your attention when you are talking to the student. If you are kind of or kind of just being generic, great. Right. There's no reason for them to engage with that person. But if you show that you're authentically thinking about this and authentically curious about it, if you're not authentic, they'll pick it up. They have a really good baloney detector. They've seen tons of grown-ups fake it, and they can spot it. So just don't fake it. Get yourself to be authentically curious about what's going on that page. So that's a handful of ideas. What I'd love to do is to hear from you about ideas that you have about this. You can either use the raise hand function, or you can just actually physically raise your hand, turn on your screen, and we'll see you actually looking at those. And like I just saw Avea's hand go up. So I'm going to bring on the mad botanist here. Whoop. Hey there.
Hey there. Um, while I was listening to you describe some of those strategies that you use, a thing I noticed about you that I really admire is that a lot of times it's not just when you're looking at student pages that you're engaging in these kind of feedback practices. I notice you do it a lot in normal conversations too, which I really appreciate about you, because when we're talking to somebody, when we're in conversation, we are giving each other feedback in the sense of, am I hearing you? Are you hearing me? And so by asking some of these questions to people that I've noticed you ask, like, what was the most interesting part of that experience for you? Or what does that make you think about? Then you're letting the people who you're talking with open up a lot more and feel really, really heard. And it's something I really admire about you. And I want to
Thank
get
you.
better. Like, it gives me ideas of what I want to do in conversations. And so I wanted to share that, so that way it's not just practice when we're looking at a person's journal pages. We can be practicing this while we talk to people in normal life. And then it gets even that much more easier when we're looking at a student's pages, because it's not a strategy or technique or a tool that we have to like pull out of some hidden nook and cranny in our brain and then dust off. It's like, oh no, we've got a lovely little neural pathway right there because we're using that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's like
Mm-hmm.
polished off and ready to go. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Thank you. See what Avea just did to get meta on this is you demonstrated in that comment that you are paying attention to me, and it makes me, the student over here, feel really, really valued and seen, right? And so as a human being, getting that kind of feedback, that where behind the feedback is, I've been watching carefully and I noticed this and I noticed this pattern. And maybe like, gosh, you care enough to sort of notice a pattern in these sorts of things. Student Jack over here, I feel really valued and validated, and it makes me want to like be even more worthy of that and pay more attention to that. So that is also just sort of a great example of sort of feedback giving, building relationships.
Exactly. Building relationships, building that connection so that that's your student really feels trust, and with trust comes safety. Um, I I don't remember exactly the psych term, but something like secure emotional attachments. You're building that with them. And also something that I know a lot of us will hear old voices in our head giving certain kinds of feedback to ourselves, hence our inner critics, who are actually trying to be rather protective of us. But if we think about it, when we're talking to students, we're becoming the voices in their heads. So if we say really kind things to them and we give feedback in a way that is like that, validating, encouraging, that becomes a voice in their head too, and it influences how they speak to themselves. And so we really want to have that with them. Even sometimes it seems like the people who say the mean things can get loudest, but the more we build that kindness inner voice into our students, then it becomes easier for them to remember that and to know on a deep instinctive level that that kinder voice is true. So that's another thing that it just makes me think of. So thank you, Jack.
Yeah. This sort of what you're saying reminds me of what Rob Wade says when he talks about kind of that, your programs and your relationships are going to grow and build at the speed of trust. And so every time you have an opportunity to interact with somebody, it's a chance to sort of say like, yeah, this is safe, and this is safe, and this is safe, and then we can grow together. We'd like to bring other voices in on the conversation as well. That's a what does this make you think about? Can you think of experiences that you've had that with feedback that inspired you and motivated you? Um, the in the chat, Susan is also kind of is also giving us feedback. There's a comment here, Yvea, that was fantastic. Become the voice inside their head. Remind them that the kinder voice is true. So just as since we're talking about feedback, that is feedback. So Avea, when you read that, how did it feel?
It made me feel warm inside. It makes me happy knowing that it's resonating with you all too. I'm seeing a couple of different people saying that that's resonating with them. So it makes
Yeah.
me
So and that also, what does that do to your relationship with Susan?
it makes me love her even more because she always, yeah, Susan always makes me feel heard. And it makes me also want to make sure that I'm making sure she is feeling heard too.
The most valuable thing that we have that we can give another person is our attention. And um, the when you pay that kind of attention, we've talked about this in other contexts, but the act of sustained, compassionate attention is love. When you give that love to another person, it changes your relationship with that person. So by giving authentic feedback like this with other to your students and engaging in these conversations, you are practicing being loving. and you're deepening your relationships with these students based on love. Think of give an opportunity to give feedback is an opportunity to love another. And Amy, I felt validated when what I said resonated with you and you wrote that back in and sort of gave it back. It makes me feel like, oh, like, see, this is how we build relationships. This let's bring Marcia in on this. Hold on a moment. We're gonna bleep. There we are. Hello, it's good to see you.
Hi, good to see everybody. So yeah, pretty interesting thoughts and questions, and it's kind of it brought up a couple things with me that isn't exactly on the current little thread talking to everybody, but a side thread maybe. But one of the things that a Native American said to me, man, shaman, teacher, healer, was if you ask the right question, you will get the right answer. So that kind of gives a whole nother perspective to insights and looking into anything that anybody does. So, and then another little side thread is there are some people, all of us as students and others who are technically clients as students, they expect a certain answer. So if you happen to come up with something else, it's quite possible that they actually stop hearing you. So then to delve into those other threads within them when they have stopped. And I've had some interesting experiences, maybe running into students that I had 10 years ago or when some other time or some other students, because there's always going to be somebody who heard you and somebody who stopped. So it was just this kind of thread, and I definitely had some really interesting things in the last couple months running into students who have left and come back to the town I live in, which would be, I could probably write a book on it. Maybe I will. So anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out. They, yeah. So otherwise, I could talk a lot longer. So I'll let
Well,
somebody else put their hand up.
but Marcia, I wanted to kind of follow up on this idea of asking the, when like if they are expecting a specific answer.
And from training, they've gone to school, they've had educators, Bible study teachers on Sunday, etc. And there is an answer that they put in, like the blank, if you will, and that's kind of in their head. So it's reframing that also.
Ah. So this is by paying authentically paying attention to this situation, you are able to come up with something that is beyond the generic, that is going to help them think about this situation perhaps through a new lens.
Yes, and also though that takes time because to find out what the answer was that they expected takes time because they've been trained to have this answer or to be given that answer in their work that they did or the red pencil on their paper to correct spelling or what when teachers have 30 students in a classroom, um, there's some straightforward answers sometimes.
Mhm. Yeah,
I'm that's way too simple. That's
yeah.
way too simple. But maybe I think we have an intelligent group here. They can probably pull on that thread. I'm seeing a couple bobbing heads. We should all make bobbleheads for all of us. We'll have a set of them.
The and it sort of makes me think that sometimes when we are, when we're giving feedback that is generic, the kind of feedback that we don't have to really pay attention to give. I think that that's the place that a lot of people kind of turn off because there's nothing really authentic going on in that. And if in kind of the conversation about things that where you think you kind of come up against sort of a generic answer yourself, we can also say this to our students, is the question of what makes you say that? All right, or what do you see that makes you say that, which is often an invitation to think beyond wherever we're currently stopped. Right. Thank you, Marcia.
Absolutely, and thank you.
Let's see, I'm going to bop over to my gallery. Did anybody, before we jump into some breakout rooms, did anybody have any other thoughts or ideas about feedback?
Okay, do you want me to say something here?
Oh,
Maybe
sure.
not, maybe not, but please bear with me
Okay.
and maybe laugh with me. So, feedback. Okay, so I signed up to do the educator certificate or whatever, and I'll be honest, I almost didn't. Partially because of another certificate, another hierarchy of who knows more than somebody else, or et cetera, et cetera. Of course, my fear of missing out like jumped in, and I had some time on my hands that I could start to watch the videos. And so I didn't even realize this was on my desk from some of the notes when I zoomed in today, but there was a question you asked in one of the and you're going to have to really forgive me, but I would be that nightmare student with this question in the classroom or someplace. But I can't remember which video that you put this in at the bottom. Is it okay if I go ahead?
Please, please.
You wrote, "What state do you need to be in to approach this activity successfully?" And I thought, California. And the thing is Illinois. The whole. So again, this gets back to if you ask the right question, you'll get the right answer. But I do believe you meant what state of consciousness you have to be.
The state of confusion.
Or confusion, yeah. So the thing is so I didn't go back to relook at the video to see. I did this so quickly that I'm not even 100% that. But my immediate response would be, and without the exact rubric, was I just kind of giggled. So this is about asking the right question, but in relationship to the video, I can make that assumption. But again, this is where you stop. I saw the word state, and I probably was reading it not thinking about consciousness. I was just reading it.
And,
or confusion.
Yeah.
So this is, again, in classrooms, things like that can kind of happen. And that's one reason, like these IQ tests or other tests that have these words or semantics, or what you heard, you stopped and you didn't hear the prepositions and you didn't hear this. But if I asked you what you heard, and you said, "What did I hear?" or I said this, or that person is telling the truth, and I'm telling the truth. It's just that you stopped hearing, or you heard what you wanted to hear from your experience, which we talked about in a couple of those neuroscience things and things like that. But anyway, I got a chuckle out of that.
That is fun. And I also like it's kind of fun to challenge the notion that there is a right question and a right answer. I would, I think that of the many right questions that are out there, you know, there are, things that kind of help somebody kind of further their path of thinking and paying attention. Those are just really useful. And perhaps, many different forms of right answer.
Right. Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. And semantics are interesting,
Mhm.
and perceptions of that. But anyway, you want to do breakup out rooms.
Yeah.
So,
Well, yeah, but maybe before we do, I'll just sort of what you were saying to sort of remind me of just the Little Prince. There's that drawing that is like this in the Little Prince book, and what is that? Um, and yeah, the answer was not a hat. Grown-ups look at it and they see a hat. Does anybody remember what it was? Amy knows. Amy, what's going on there?
It's a snake that has eaten an elephant.
Ah, that's right. That's so being open to all the snakes eating elephants out there. The let's drop into some breakout rooms now with some of our friends. And the way that this is going to work is I'm going to invite anybody to hold up a journal page. And then what you'll do is as a group, just use that as an example of how you would give feedback, and what's going on here. Often a useful strategy is, if you don't really know what's going on, you can always ask somebody, tell me about this. Or tell me more about the experience of doing this. Sometimes with little people, if you don't understand what's going on the page, they'll say, well, this is the puppy and this is the walrus, and look, they're on a boat together. And you go like, ah. Um, and but then use some of these strategies. And what you can do is you can bounce around. Have different people sort of try to give feedback on something, and then you can then I'm going to also encourage you to, as educators, then turn around and talk to each other on a meta level about kind of what was working with giving feedback there. Are there any things that you can generalize from that? And the more practice we get at doing this, the better and better we get. I got much better at doing this during the pandemic when we started doing these online classes, because every week people would show me nature journal pages and we got to give feedback on them. And so I'm going to now, so yeah, again, I just want to encourage people to, that's too many people, that's too few people. All right, we're gonna have 3 breakout rooms, and that will be 3 to 4 people per room. And I'm going to encourage us to go there now. And what we'll do is we will take 15 minutes in this breakout room and then come on back here. So that means at 10 after, we will be back in here together. Does that sound good, Avea? The time? 2 thumbs up. All right, everybody, have fun in the wild, wild world of Feedforward. Hey, everybody's back. Hello there, my friends. I want to invite people to take a moment to reflect on the conversations that you just had. And if there is a key takeaway for yourself, just to write that down on a piece of paper in front of you at this time. Right. If anybody would like to share either an aha or a thought that came from that opportunity to give each other feedback, I would like to invite you to do so at this time. And you can just use the raise hand function like that. Good demonstration of how to use the raise hand function there, Larry. Add you into the spotlight, and I think you can unmute.
Yep. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes, loud and clear.
Fantastic. During our discussion, a really wonderful kind of line of inquiry piece of feedback that was given to me specifically was kind of where are you going, or do you plan on taking this set of observations and doing something again in the future? Is this part of a series? Is this part of this kind of time lapse that you're doing? Because I had showed some stuff I was doing to describe a prescribed burn that I had been able to participate in this past February. And they asked, you know, are you kind of documenting this over time? And I had never thought about that. And I think that piece of feedback was really great because it was this really cool question of, hey, where is this going next? Or do you plan on taking this somewhere after this? And I thought, well, I guess I could. I could visit in the summer and see what new wildflowers have emerged and how the ecosystem is changing. I hadn't even considered taking that next step, but because of that piece of feedback of the continuation type of question, I was inspired to do something new. So I thought that was really great and something that I'll probably adopt as well.
That's a good thought. It really just sort of shows how having, like, when we think inside our head, it doesn't end up very well for us. We do so much better if we can then think on a piece of paper. And then if you can bring more people into a discussion, you're sort of making a, this sort of the concept of distributed cognition is that our thinking isn't just what happens inside our brain, but it happens what happens on the piece of paper, what happens in conversation with other people. And so all of those things can help us be able to think better when we do this with a club.
Absolutely. Yeah. It gives us new ideas and helps us think better for sure. So I loved that.
I love that. So testimonial that getting feedback and feed forward on your nature journals helps us be able to think. That's cool. Thank you. And let's see. Did anybody else have a thought, comment, or idea that they wanted to share? Okay. And now for the people, if there's anybody in the group who was thinking to themselves, I have an idea, but I often in these conversations share things, and I was practicing holding back there. Now is an opportunity for you to step forward if you feel comfortable doing so. I tend to be an oversharer, so I often kind of try to get myself to simmer down a little bit. Hey there, Susan.
Hey there. Same here. I do feel like I like to talk. I actually had a question relating to this, and I don't know to what extent this applies to sort of the question of teaching or feedback on nature journaling specifically. But as you just folks know, I teach math, and so I think certainly my question kind of applies to a math teaching context, but maybe to others. And it's like with nature, there's no wrong answer. There's no wrong drawing, right? With math, there are sometimes things that are incorrect because we're dealing with a logical process, and sometimes the logic just isn't true. Yep. And so that is tricky because then sometimes I do actually have to tell students that the thing that they wrote in is actually incorrect, and you gotta separate your identity from that fact. But so something that I've noticed myself doing recently a few times that I do specifically with students who are I see are kind of thinking mathematically, who are comfortable with kind of some higher level thinking in mathematics. Not all of them are. And so for some students, I think this is going to be like too. Yeah, I think it depends on the student a lot. But for some students, they're not going to feel anxious about this. I'll point out an area where like they made a mistake. They did something that didn't work, but what they tried was really interesting, and the way it didn't work or the reason it didn't work was interesting. And I sort of like, I'm not going to say this explicitly to students, but like it failed, but it failed in an interesting way. And so I've noticed a few times, for example, and this is the curse of the mathematician, is that we get excited about this kind of thing, but students don't want to be told that their teacher's excited that they made a mistake. So I have to be very conscious of how I talk about this and things. But I think that I see students sometimes who benefit from that kind of discussion of like, let's look at this. Like, here's the reason it didn't work. That's a 2-minute discussion. Now here's the 10-minute conversation back and forth about why it's really interesting and how you could take this idea that you had that was really good and figure out how to make it work, and how it's totally different than what I was expecting you to do, but you could actually make it work. And like, let's develop some, and let's like innovate in mathematics. So occasionally this happens. I'm not really sure how that connects to nature drilling, because it's such a different, I mean, in so many ways, a lot of what we discussed, applies to all these different areas of thinking. But it's, I don't know. I don't know what the question is really. It's just this sort of question of, I guess, finding things that maybe aren't successful in the way the person was intending, and turning that into a strength. And I think that that's part of growth mindset, is the idea that of not being attached or making your identity the fact that the things that you're doing are successful. Yes. But turning that into something where, okay, if it was successful, that's great. The next thing that I do will be more successful. And if it wasn't successful, that's great. I have an opportunity to figure out why it wasn't. So I think that's, once you've fostered the growth mindset, I guess you can kind of go down that rabbit hole, I guess. But I don't know. It's, a little bit of coherence.
I wonder if at the start of a semester, you actually had that conversation with the students, and you said that, sometimes what happens is this phenomena where there's something didn't work out because of, the logic didn't follow. But it is interesting, and just sort of say to them, like, and it's, I've had different experiences sort of talking about these sort of things with some students. If for some people, the idea that I did something wrong is mortifying and shuts them down. And other people are able to sort of track into this conversation of what happened when we tried it this way. And we're able to really kind of get richer nuance out of that conversation, and to let them know that if I end up having that conversation with you, it's a really, really good thing. And it also means that I trust in you enough to be able to risk having this conversation with you. And so should that happen to us later in the semester, it's a good thing.
Yeah, I think that's good. I also, I mean, one thing that I will also do frequently when I teach is I'll solicit an answer in a situation where I know no one's going to guess the right answer, and I'm not looking for that. And so I'll actually explicitly ask the class to give me a wrong answer.
Yeah.
Because and I think I kind of crystallized, like, it's part of the same principle as this idea of getting it out of your brain onto the paper so you can poke it. Which is, give me a wrong answer, because if I just have an open-ended question, I don't know what to do with that, right? But if I have some answer, if I have something, now I can look at that possible answer and I can figure out why it's wrong, and I will have learned something. And if I figure out why it's wrong, now I know, okay, was the answer too low for what the correct answer should be, or is it too high? Now I know a better guess, and we can work with that. And it's so I think, and it's the same kind of thing. I think, as I think the same question of, putting your questions down on paper, putting your ideas down on paper, because then you can look at them and they might be wrong ideas. They might be, things that aren't true. But once they're on the paper, you have brain space available for investigating them. And it doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. The point is that now it's out of your head. So now you can actually poke it. You can actually do something. Ivea was saying it can involve mirroring in math feedback too, as you trace the students' mental footprints. And I'm not sure what you're referring. I don't know quite what you mean by that, but I'd love to hear more of what you're saying. And Ivea, I know you said your thumbs are making it distracted. I'm not sure if there was more that you wanted to see read out, but yeah. So I'm not sure that I know what you mean by that, but if you're able to unthump, I'd love to know what you say.
I'll try to talk. I apologize if they begin thumping again. I have construction crew in back who are hitting the walls pretty loud. What I was trying to was
we actually don't hear any of it.
They're not thumping at the moment, but they might start up again.
Oh.
The thing is that, because I hear what Susan is saying about the concern that with math, there do tend to be right and wrong answers, but the process of feedback can still go a bit away from that to be more about the process of thinking. So that when you're feedbacking with a student, then you are actually focusing on their process of thinking or trying to figure things out. And so with that, when a student, it's less about, what's your answer, and more about, so how were you thinking about it? And so then the student describes. So I tried to use I tried to find a standard deviation by doing this. And you're like, okay, so the first step you used was this. And they're like, right. And then I got this. And then what I did with that one is that I tried to use the sum of all squares. And you're like, oh, okay. So then after that, you try to use the sum of all squares. But then was there a step in there that involved doing this first, or how did you, and then you kind of talk them
What is that actually telling you about those wild mustard taproots that this data comes from?
That's good.
When you actually do this, what does that actually tell you about those taproots when you find the sum of squares? Yeah, I think it's always my favorite thing. We were talking about statistics and how I always, as much as I can turn it back to the actual real world phenomenon that data comes from, better. And a lot of students, they want to just do the procedure and get it over with as fast as possible. So they don't want to do that, but it's good for them.
Yeah.
That's fun.
Oh, sorry. Please continue. I was just going to reflect.
I'm trying to interrupt yet.
So then the idea with that is that as you trace each of their footsteps, then you also unpack why this footstep, why that footstep, or then you can say to them, oh, okay, so then right in here, and then you might say, here's where I think that there's a step that we should include, and then you say, the student might say, why is that? And then you say, okay, because of this reason, does that make sense? And so it's kind of going back and forth to ask, is that making sense? And then also it invites the student to say, no, it's not making sense because of X, Y, Z, or the student might say, no, I thought it was this. And so because of that, it's still centered around listening to the student instead of just telling them, oh no, this is the procedure, blah, 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 blah. And then you lose the student through whatever the fourth step was. Instead, it's still about listening and seeing where the student is mentally, the thumps are starting again. And listening is feedback. So that's how I think that it can be less about the answer and more about listening to the students' thoughts. And so that's why I was saying that way you're mirroring in math feedback by tracing a student's mental footsteps, by saying back what you think you're hearing.
Thanks for explaining that. Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, and I think that also ties back to the nature journaling or anything else, because again, you can be asking someone, what was your process like? Oh, you investigated this flower and you sort of you pulled apart the fangs of the orchid. What does that mean? How was it hard to pull it apart? What was the process? My lanes in my discussion got cut a little short, but I was going to ask that question, but you can ask some of the same kinds of questions about like the process of investigation. or the process of drawing. Like, did you find what was your thought process? How did you break down this drawing to be able to draw it too?
Exactly. In any case, it's a process. But Jack, you were going to say something earlier.
Yeah, what you're saying sort of made this conversation brings up two things for me. One, I like the distinction that you created there, Avea, between the difference between, say, giving feedback or forward on something versus correcting your paper. In one, we're just interested in what the answer is at the end. And the other, there's a conversation about how are we thinking about this. And that's where things get really interesting. But usually it's just things stop at, I get my red pen out and I'm going to correct, but put a check mark next to all the wrong ones.
I just sort of remind of what I was saying, something I was saying last week, which is I have very little interest in this number here. I have very little interest in this answer here. What I'm much more interested in is, what is the story that all the numbers are telling me? Or what is the story that your whole work told me about how you got to that answer?
Yeah.
And if you got the wrong answer, okay, you made a silly mistake, whatever. But did your thinking make sense? Did you try something that was different than what I was expecting? That's even more exciting.
Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to think about is this concept of interesting, where there's something interesting happening here. I find that very often when we're, if I'm talking to a group of students about a phenomenon and we're trying to do a could it be sort of a process with it. When I'm trying to get students to generate possible hypotheses, a lot of kids are focused on wanting to have one that is correct. And the idea of having presented a hypothesis that might be sort of falsified or get evidence against it down the line is they don't want to go there. And so it very often in those conversations, it helps for me to sort of say, in these sorts of situations, don't worry about having a correct answer. Very often it is more useful for our thinking about this just to be interesting. So can you come up with an interesting possible explanation for this? And we're not in this case worried about being right or wrong. We'll do some hypothesis testing down the line where we kind of get to peel those things out. But the first step at where we are right now, we want to generate different possible explanations of why something could be.
As if we get our brain stuck on one hypothesis, and that might lead to some fixed mindset about that one hypothesis being one.
And keep looking for evidence for that hypothesis.
Yeah.
But you won't be thinking about what other hypotheses that evidence might support or what evidence there might be against it.
Right.
Kirsten in the chat said, I think that's an interesting approach.
Pesky confirmation bias.
What could this be? Wrong answers only. Which is a fun exercise. If the goal is to come up with wrong answers, then you can be as ridiculous as you want. Also, the thing about coming up with wrong hypotheses is you can't ever prove the correct one, but you can disprove 5 wrong hypotheses. So if you've come up with 5 wrong hypotheses that you can disprove, then you feel a great sense of accomplishment at the end because you've disproved a bunch of hypotheses. So
I like that Kirsten mentioned that, because earlier we were thinking about the fun game that you play sometimes with certain memes where you say, who is this or what are they doing? Wrong answers only. Like, the one where you see like maybe a picture of Anakin Skywalker and then people write down, who is this? Wrong answers only. And it can be anything from Kermit the Frog to Anakin Skywalker Jedi Master. That's a burn. I'm sorry, but it's a burn because he never got to be a master. Anyways, so yeah, like that. It just reminds me of that. And then you can be really playful with it. Marley does something similar with questions where he has us ask some utterly ridiculous questions or come up with some utterly, exactly like what you said, ridiculous reasons for why something, like what something is doing or why something is doing it. So that can be, it can bring some of the playfulness back.
Yeah, and coming up with possible plausibles is...
And also impossible plausibles or implausible possibles.
There we go. Let's see what you did.
You gonna rub my nose in it? The great thing I was just thinking about was, and this came up earlier in the discussion, was this idea of seeing somebody's page and seeing the questions that they've asked on their page, and and bring at that and how that's interesting, fun to discuss. And I think that one thing that would maybe not be a great idea is if you see someone ask a certain question, and you know the answer because you just know it, like then just telling them the answer. I mean, if they have a question, they do genuinely want to know, but also it's more fun to discuss it and investigate it than it is to just be told.
Yeah.
Plus, that makes me remember this particularly really good John Prine quote that is on Jack's website. A question ain't really a question when you know the answer to. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. This is good. Yeah. Sometimes with a question, if I know the answer, I have this sort of strange calculus in my head. Is it more useful to drop an answer in there to elicit a richer question on the other side of it, or to leave that hanging as a mystery? But very often, if we sort of think that our job as a science educator is to be the person who fills in all the blank lines with answers, then we get really excited when somebody asks a question that we know the answer to. And we try to uncomfortably divert the conversation away from a topic where we don't know the answer. Yeah, it is whether or not we answer a question, what is going to be most interesting to that student's thinking.
There's a thing I've also seen people do where a person, I'm pretty sure, has an answer or knows an answer to a question, but they'll ask it anyway because they suspect that the person they're asking the question to has a different answer, and they want to know their thinking behind that different answer. Which I find a very interesting strategy.
This makes me think of in the book, but I keep on wanting to say The Power of Positive Thinking, but no, The Power of Making Thinking Visible.
Yes.
About there was one actually that had to do with clarifying questions versus probing questions, and this idea of how a student would explain something or talking about some whatever they're working on, and then other students could ask questions, but they were asked to specify, I have a clarifying question or I have a probing question. And a clarifying question was for the person asking the question to understand better. And a probing question was a question that might elicit more thinking from the person they're asking the question to, or from everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And they're both useful kinds of questions. And so we could, and that was really, that like that. If there was one thing, the best thing I took out of it, well, there's a lot of good things I took out of that book, but that one specific idea of
that's useful,
making explicit, do I have a clarifying question or a probing question? And sometimes it's a little both, and sometimes I or a student doesn't know which one they're asking. But I think that's really good, and I think so yeah. But I think the answer to the question of should I answer the question that the person has put on their nature journal page, I think the answer to that question is do whatever is going to elicit more conversation or more interesting conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I think to answer the question, if we said not to.
Because the little factoids, the little bits of information are the important thing. What is important, the more stretchy and energetic and rich our discourse and thinking.
I'm thinking,
after.
I'm thinking specifically of a journal page that I shared quite a long time ago, where I had a question about, like, there's this mockingbird kept doing this thing, and I shared this, and I think it was during Wild Wonder that I shared this in a group, and so somebody immediately said, "Oh, well, that's this is what mockingbirds do; they're displaying or something." But then that kind of ended the conversation, and there wasn't really anything else to say, and then something else happened, and I mean, like, other people wanted to share, not a big deal, but it was sort of felt a little frustrating because I'm like, yeah, that was my guess, but wouldn't it have been more fun to discuss it and like see if anyone has seen that behavior in other circumstances? But
Another thing that I will do is if people are asking me a question that I think has a straightforward answer, I'll say to the best of my knowledge, or I think it's this way, because I'm leaving room that I could be wrong. And also it allows other people to go and check on that answer themselves, which means that they're going to be investigating it more. Not to mention that even if we do think that we really know that answer, depending on what field you're in, and Laramie said something about this recently about plant identification, the field might change and everything you think you know might be a lie, the way that Asparagiaceae is a lie. No, not really. It's not a lie.
Messing with us.
Laramie gets it. Laramie gets it. Is that at first they were all lilies and now they're all asparagus and now it's taking over the world and the entire monocots. Anyways, the point is
They're
that
doing it specifically to you, Avea. I'm just saying.
I know that they are, and I have my eye on them. Anyways, like the knowledge that you think you know that you were taught might have changed. So I think it's really useful to say, as far as I know, or to the best of my knowledge, or I think it works like this, because then it leaves the possibility open for other people to investigate that knowledge.
Yeah.
Or there might be, there might be an answer that you know that's generally true, but it might not be the end of the story in that specific circumstance. It might be that there's different things at play in that circumstance, and so there might be more that you're not aware of. So, but yeah, I think no need to withhold information if you know something that's relevant to the question, I guess. But just, I guess talk about it in a way that enhances further conversation.
So we've got two little sidecars on this topic. This topic, by the way, is incredibly rich and really, really important stuff for us to think about as educators. How do we know what we know? And how do our students know what they know? Is it because we told them? That's interesting. One of the great questions from The Power of Making Thinking Visible, which is that book which we read in book club some time ago, is what makes you say that? Somebody makes a claim. What makes you say that? Another version of that that's slightly longer, that is the one that they use in visual thinking strategies, is somebody makes a claim about something and they'll say, what do you see that makes you say that? And so what they're asking for is, what is the evidence behind that claim? And so very often when we give answers and things, people tend to just drop an answer out there. And that is different from giving the evidence for something and saying, like, I support this explanation because of whatever it is. And then or this is something, and another thing that you can do is to cite the source of your information. You can say, I read in this book that it was this, but they didn't cite what the evidence for that was. But I've heard this from a couple of people. A friend of mine who's a naturalist said blah, blah, blah. I wonder if that is the case, or if maybe there are multiple things going on here. And that way we are, when there is a source of evidence coming in with an answer, then that helps qualify that answer with the strength of the evidence for it. Because what I like to try to move my students towards and move myself towards, instead of thinking of things as right and wrong, or here's the answer for this, is to hold an explanation in proportion to the strength of the evidence for it. And so if I just give an answer, I don't allow anybody to do that. If I give an answer and say, this is according to this source, and they were saying, here's the evidence for that, that's great. Or I have seen this on these occasions, that is then connecting this evidence with this explanation. The people who did visual thinking strategies came up with a system for handling questions and statements from students that actually I like this so much, I made a visual of it and I put it on the back of one of my journals. And I'm going to find that for you.
I might also add in, for anybody who's interested, we did have some guests from Visual Thinking Strategies come to the Educators Forum a while ago, and there is a recording of that. If anybody's curious to know more about that, I can put the link into the chat shortly.
So I can just look at these books, because I know it's on the cover of one. No, 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 no. no, 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 no. This is not looking very good. There's none of those. Maybe it's just one of those ones that's still left on the shelf. What would the odds be?
Hands up, who wants to
Ah,
go spend the afternoon in Jack's study and read all the books?
Hmm?
You still want to come over, spend the afternoon in your study and just read all the books. Ooh.
So it's a flow chart. What do you notice about this animal, this picture, right? Now, if they say, so if they say something where they're giving evidence, right? Like it has sharp teeth, like you're holding up a skull. What do you notice here? What's going on here? Then you can say, what might this tell us about the animal? In which case they draw a conclusion that it's a carnivore, right? And then you can paraphrase that and then kind of go on to what more can we find. If, however, they start with a conclusion, it's a carnivore, then you turn to, what do you see that makes you say that? Asking for the evidence. And then you can, paraphrase that. So there are these two ways of kind of going to the same thing. In one case, the student gives evidence and you encourage them to draw what conclusions can you draw from that. Or if they're starting off with conclusions, you ask for the evidence. I thought that was so cool. And I've used this in science discussions with kids at my daughter's school. And it's gold. It's gold. Just having that, like, oh, you gave evidence. What can that tell us? You gave a conclusion. What's the evidence? And it sort of gives me like the next step. I'm going to hold that up because I think this is just like, this is high percentage. Screenshot time. Right? Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. All right. So, yeah, whenever other people have some big ideas, I put them down on paper. I try to. We have started riding a pony that will go forever, but I think we need to draw things to a close shortly so that people can get themselves some lunch, so people do not drop from hypoglycemia. We do not want that happening in our community here, but we do look forward to more exciting and interesting conversations with all of you in the future. We hope that this workshop was helpful for you, coming up with some strategies for thinking about feedback, and we hope that you enjoyed this deep geek out on thinking about our epistemology and how we can handle questions. I want to send a special shout out to my friend and colleague, Evea, the mad botanist Moore. Thank you so much for helping shepherd us through all this thinking. And let me see here. Evea, can I bring you on screen? There we are. Also want to thank everybody for your participation in our discussions. It's through sharing your ideas that we all get smarter. And we really, really appreciate your time, thoughts, energy, and wisdom. Do you have any parting thoughts for this crew?
Yes. First of all, thank you to you, Jack, for creating this space and for creating this fun intellectual environment where we get to play with ideas together. That's why we keep coming back. So thank you for creating this space for us to keep coming back to. And also, if you are either watching the videos now or watching the videos in future, Jack has a session on feedback and feed forward. So Ebbinghaus that business and go check out the video. Especially because Jack used the magic teacher phrase a couple of times today. So Ebbinghaus it. Ebbinghaus it. Okay, sorry, I'm way too enthusiastic. Thank you to you, Jack, and to everybody here.
And thank you indeed. Dear friends, until we meet again, this has been a lot of fun. Thanks for playing with us today. And we're just getting started here. More to come. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.